China is preparing to launch an all-out war on Taiwan as it draws ever nearer to its long-held ambitions of bringing the country under its control. When that war will take place is still up in the air, with 2024 being a distinct possibility. According to Global Guardian, the period between 2024 and 2028 will involve various trigger points that could provide windows of opportunity to China to invade Taiwan. And when it eventually decides to climb through one of those windows, China will absolutely want to be ready in every way possible. That's why it's upgrading its air bases. China knows that achieving aerial superiority over Taiwan will help it to negate the country's navy, giving Beijing a clear pathway to victory. But what do those upgrades entail? And will there really be enough for China to achieve the smash-and-grab victory it needs to take control of Taiwan before any other, more powerful countries can respond? Before we can answer these questions, we need to start by asking another. Is China's invasion of Taiwan as imminent as it seems? It is if the news coming out of Taiwan during the last few months is anything to go by. According to the country's government, it's been observing increasing Chinese activity throughout the latter quarter of 2023, indicating that China is gearing up to launch a serious military offensive. Take the reports from October 2023, published in Reuters as an example. In that month, Taiwan's defense ministry reported that it had tracked 15 planes belonging to the People's Liberation Army Air Force, or the PLAAF, in its air defense zone on the morning of October 26th. Those planes included several fighter jets and drones, alongside several Chinese warships that appeared to be carrying out combat readiness drills and patrols near Taiwanese waters. These reports were followed up a little less than a month later, this time published in the UK newspaper The Guardian. Taiwan reported that it had seen Chinese military activity within the Taiwan Strait. Much of that activity was focused on the Davis Line, a theoretical median line that runs directly down the middle of the strait and serves as an unofficial border between the waters that each country owns. 9 Chinese aircraft were reported, along with several warships, all carrying out more combat readiness patrols. More details were provided about these operations, with Taiwan reporting that it had spotted Su-30 and J-10 fighters, the latter being one of China's main multi-role fighters. Furthermore, Taiwan claimed it had seen several aircraft that appeared to serve electronic warfare and early warning purposes, perhaps suggesting that China was surveilling Taiwanese waters in addition to conducting drills above them. Taiwan responded by sending its own naval forces out to monitor the situation. But even that didn't seem to deter the Chinese. Toward the end of December 2023, not coincidentally during the weeks building up to the January 13th election that will determine Taiwan's next president, even more Chinese operations were conducted over the sensitive Davis Line. Taiwan's defense ministry reported spotting J-10, J-11, and J-16 fighter jets this time around, as well as early warning aircraft. In total, 10 Chinese planes crossed the Davis Line, again accompanied by Chinese warships, as part of Beijing's combat readiness patrols. What's noteworthy about these incidents isn't the fact that they're taking place. Taiwan is no stranger to dealing with Chinese operations within the Taiwan Strait. In fact, it's pointed out that they've been happening for at least 4 years, with its warnings apparently falling on deaf ears. No, what's noteworthy about these operations is that they represent a ramping up of Chinese activity in the water, and crucially, much of that activity is centered on the Davis Line. In the past, China has operated near that line without typically crossing it. But in these most recent drills, it flaunted its power in Taiwan's face to the point where it crossed the line multiple times, literally and metaphorically, in what could have been described as indirect acts of aggression. Granted, the Chinese planes haven't launched any attacks, but China is using these operations to send a message. We can cross into your waters and even fly over them if we want to. Think of the operations as veiled threats. China is revealing a little about its strength without showing its whole hand, leaving Taiwan to wonder what its true intentions are. But the reality is likely there's little to wonder about. China may be using these combat readiness operations to literally test the waters in the Taiwan Strait. How far can it fly or sail over them before a response comes from either Taiwan or the global community? Could it even bait Taiwan into launching an attack on one of its planes, giving Beijing an excuse to launch an all-out assault? Whatever the answer to those questions turn out to be, it is clear China isn't shying away from throwing its military weight around. And that brings us neatly to the main subject of this video: China's insane airbase upgrades. While its operations and drills in the Taiwan Strait are examples of outward displays of force by the Chinese, its work on several air bases that would likely serve as launching points for its aerial attacks on Taiwan have been much more covert. Let's shed some light on those upgrades. They're actually threefold. According to an October 2021 article published by The Drive, China has focused its upgrades on 3 crucial air bases, all of which are in easy proximity to Taiwan. These bases are the Zhangzhou Air Base, which is 248 miles from Taipei, the Huinan Air Base, a mere 173 miles from Taiwan's capital, and of course Longqian Air Base, which is just 135 miles away from Taiwan. All 3 represent imminent threats to Taipei because they provide China with a much stronger front presence bordering the Taiwan Strait than it had previously. We'll start with the Longqian Air Base. According to the Federation of American Scientists, or FAS, this base has been in operation since 1969. It was in that year that satellite imagery of the base emerged, appearing to show a facility that had a hard surface and a runway that stretched at least 8,000 feet. At the time, the facility had 30 dispersed revetted hardstands, each being capable of storing between 1 and 3 PLAAF fighters, along with a pair of alert hardstands, with one at either end of the runway. The FAS estimated that based on these old images, the Longqian base could support up to 90 aircraft, making it a clear threat to Taiwan. And yet, it wasn't, at least not for much of the 2000s. Though the base remained in general operation, satellite images of a row of J-6 fighter jets was captured as recently as 2009. Little had occurred within the base to suggest that China was making it a priority. But by the time the 2020s rolled around, satellite imagery was starting to show increasing amounts of infrastructural work at the base. For instance, the Drive reported in 2021 that China appeared to have built several munitions bunkers at the base, which would be crucial for keeping its jets stocked with ammo during runs across the Taiwan Strait. It also reported that there appeared to be expansion work taking place on each end of the 8,000-foot runway, along with construction of several new aprons used to help pilots board and deplane their aircraft. That same report also highlighted the development of at least 4 hardened aircraft structures, each located at one end of the base and directly connected to the runway. These structures would probably serve as the only protective form of infrastructure on the site, making them a likely place for China to store aircraft in the future. Beyond storage, the structures also serve to keep prying eyes at bay. Yes, satellite imagery may be able to show that the 4 structures exist, but unless scientists figure out a way to equip their satellites with X-ray specs, nobody can know exactly what's inside the structures until China's ready to launch their attack. The upgrades didn't end there. Several new barracks and administrative buildings started cropping up at the base in 2021. That matters because both types of buildings represent a likely increase in the number of personnel stationed at Longqian. Worrying news for Taiwan, given that it's the closest of China's bases to its shores. All of these upgrades occurred during or before 2021. In 2022, the news came that satellite imagery revealed that Longqian was fully operational again. The base had sat somewhat dormant for several years, only to become a hotbed of activity in that year. Flanker fighter jets appeared to join the lineup of J-6s at the base, according to satellite imagery, though it's unclear whether these flankers are intended to be upgrades and the outdated J-6s are accompaniments to them. The images showed 3 of those jets, a pair on the base's main ramp and one at the southern end of its runway. It's not outside of the realms of possibility that these flankers might have been among those that the Taiwanese authorities have seen moving into their airspace over the last few months. It also appears the airbase now has the capacity to launch drones. Satellite images show a small cluster of storage shelters in a walled-in area that appears to have earthen coverings on top. Though the immediate assumption would be that these would be munition storage buildings, those tend to be spaced further apart, both to help with remaining jets in different areas of the base and to make them less of a target for attacking forces. However, the fact that these shelters seem to have drive-through capabilities suggests that they might serve as the ideal location to store drones that are intended to be made ready for deployment. That's crucial for China. Though drones offer little in the way of attacking power, they're ideal for 2 purposes. For one, they can act as decoys, distracting air defenses in preparation for larger attacks. But more importantly, drones are vital for reconnaissance in modern aerial warfare. Not only can the drones essentially highlight a clear route for Chinese jets to fly, but those with large ranges can even spy on Taiwanese coastal defenses, cluing China into what it faces should it cross the Taiwan Strait and launch a full-on invasion. Take the WZ-8 as an example. Making their first appearance during a parade to mark the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China in 2019, these new drones are believed to be capable of achieving supersonic speeds. That speed, coupled with the drone's design, means that it's more than capable of penetrating radar systems to stealthily survey and perhaps even attack an enemy. Thanks to satellite images obtained in 2022, we know that China is storing these new drones at Luan Air Base, which is another base that's seen extensive upgrades. Roughly 560 miles away from Taiwan, the base is well within the WZ-8's 3,100-mile maximum range. Might China ship some of those drones to Longqian and move them closer to Taiwan so that the PLAAF can take even greater advantage of the range? We don't know for sure, though the storage spaces cropping up at the base would be perfect for holding several of those powerful drones. Let's return to the J-6s for a moment. The Shenyang J-6 is among the oldest planes in the PLAAF's fleet, having seen its maiden flight in December 1958 before being introduced to the PLAAF in December 1961. Surely the elimination of these fighters from the Longqian base would be a greater sign of upgrades than anything else. Not necessarily. Though the J-6's days as a straight aerial combatant are long behind it, converted versions of these aircraft are believed to still be used for limited training exercises by the PLAAF. More worryingly for Taiwan, it's also believed by many that the PLAAF maintains these jets so they can be used as decoys in aerial operations, pulling attention away from more modern jets and aerial threats. Perhaps we can think of the J-6s as a swarm of flies. They're not going to be able to cause much damage, but they still have to be dealt with, meaning Taiwanese fighters could end up expending valuable missiles on these decoy jets, leaving them unable to deal with the more modern flankers that appear to be cropping up in Longqian. The Drive also speculates that China might go so far as to load their J-6s with explosives, essentially converting them into crude cruise missiles used to attack larger targets. Add all of this to the possibility of the use of disposable electronic payloads, both delivered by those fighters and others, that could scramble Taiwanese air defenses, and you have some clear reasons why China is keeping its fleet of J-6s at Longqian. Still, it's worth noting that all of these Longqian upgrades don't appear to be complete yet. Though the base looks to be brimming with new activity, satellite imagery shows that many of the new installations aren't yet complete. But the fact remains that Longqian is now larger and it includes many more facilities than it's had for many years, transforming it into a base that presents a genuine threat to Taiwan. And it's not the only one. Next up, we turn our attention to Hui'an Air Base. Much like Longqian Air Base, 2020 saw China implement some impressive upgrades to what was once a fairly outdated facility. Many of those improvements mirror those seen at Longqian. The Drive reports that satellite images show the construction of 3 new storage bunkers, all of which appear to be hardened, so they offer more protection to whatever the PLAAF stores inside. Expansion work also appears to be underway on the base's pair of runways, though few details have emerged in terms of just how long those new runways will be. This expansion work is also carried through to the base's jet fighter apron, which appears to now be capable of holding 14 more jet fighters. Again, we're seeing signs of increased capacity throughout the base, suggesting that the PLAAF intends to increase personnel and capabilities, likely in preparation for operations further to those it's been running in the Taiwan Strait. In short, China's making it easier for itself to move air assets to these 2 bases. That should concern Taiwan. Longqian and Hui'an are the 2 closest bases that China has to Taiwan. By increasing capacity, while making it easier to both transport and store fighter jets, at these bases, China is sending a clear signal of intent that it's arming itself for a future conflict. After all, if China didn't intend to use the bases for something, it wouldn't be investing the millions of dollars required to transform them into such effective strongholds for their fighters. Taiwan is well aware of this. In December 2023, the Wall Street Journal published a YouTube video that examined some of the upgrades occurring at the 2 bases. In that video, the media outlet highlighted a Taiwanese biannual defense report in which Taiwan wrote stark warnings about the completion of construction at the airfields near the Chinese coast and the realigning of new fighters at the bases. It said that the upgrades are intended to help China form a superior air power, put pressure on air defense, and seize air superiority in the event of a war across the Taiwan Strait. It's difficult to see the upgrades in any other light. Switching our attention to the Zhangjiao base, the furthest of the 3 from Taiwan, we see China's focus being placed on different upgrades. Satellite imagery confirms that the PLAAF is building a new surface-to-air missile, or a SAM, defense site at the base, which would be the 3rd such site at Zhangjiao. These sites are naturally intended to shoot out any threat from the skies China might face. Say, for example, one of the 150 F-16 fighter jets that Taiwan purchased from the United States in 1997. With these upgrades, we also see China isn't focused solely on attack. While Longqian and Hui'an appear to be prepared as the launching points for Chinese jets, Zhangjiao might be getting turned into a defensive base that could offer those jets aerial support if a battle over the Taiwan Strait reached the Chinese coast. It's also notable that Zhangjiao is the PLAAF's headquarters for its Eastern Theater Command. All the more reason to ensure that Taiwan won't be able to claim it. Add all of this to the construction of hardened shelters at Longqian and Hui'an, and we see increasing concern for the survivability of China's aerial assets. That's pointed out in the previously mentioned video by the Wall Street Journal, which suggests that China knows that any attack it launches on Taiwan would lead to a retaliatory strike. The proximity of these shelters enables aircraft at the Longtian site, for instance, to quickly taxi into cover, while the Zhangzhou site SAMs divert Taiwanese attention away from them. With attention successfully diverted, the jets could then leave the shelters and taxi to the runway, ready to join the fighting. It all adds up to a scary prospect for Taiwan, and things get even more frightening when you realize that China isn't just upgrading its existing bases along its eastern coast, it's building new ones. According to satellite imagery revealed in 2021, China has been hard at work on a new helicopter base in Zhangpu County in the Fujian province. The base, which would be just 150 miles from Taiwan shores, will serve as a military heliport and will obviously bring with it a direct threat to the Taiwanese mainland. But even more worrying for Taipei, it places China's military attack choppers within touching distance of several Taiwan-controlled islands within the Taiwan Strait. It's believed that work began on the new site at some point between May and June of 2019, with the details suggesting that it'll be a significant base. The images reveal a single runway that's about 2,140 feet long, with a circular turnaround on its eastern end. Another flight line, this one measuring about 6,000 feet, runs somewhat parallel to the runway, though it appears to be narrower. A quick scan of Google Earth satellite images shows what appears to be 18 completed hangars, along with a further 9 in varying states of construction, running along the ramp near the main runway. The images also show what appear to be 10 completed helipads, along with a further 17 spots that are marked off using large squares, which will probably also be turned into helipads. But what's most troublesome for Taiwan is that the images also show a trio of Mi-8 or Mi-17 HIP-type helicopters already in situ at the base. Why do those choppers matter? China typically uses them as part of special forces operations, which lends even more credence to the theory that Beijing is building these bases as it prepares for an all-out assault on a country that it claims to own. We've already seen Taipei highlighting the increasing threat it faces from China in several reports, but Taiwan isn't simply sitting back and waiting for China to launch an attack. In December 2023, Warrior Maven reported that the country has set up a new training base, specifically focused on the F-16V fighter jets it received from the US, that it'll likely use to sharpen its pilot skills ready for war. Situated in the Kaohsiung Gangshan district of Taiwan, the base was subject of an essay published by the country's central news agency that pointed out how cadets will learn how to carry out basic defense, offense, and tactical formations in basic flight training before moving on to more advanced skills. In reality, the F-16Vs might provide a little defense against China's 5th-generation J-20s. However, there's no direct evidence that these land-launched jets are currently present in either of the 3 bases discussed in the video. Though that doesn't mean that they're not there. Satellite imagery doesn't show everything, and it's entirely possible that the PLAAF has J-20s in storage under its covered shelters, ready to fly at a moment's notice. It's also worth pointing out that the United States hasn't ignored these developments. Al Jazeera reported that the US had agreed to build 4 new bases of its own in the Philippines back in March 2023. Those bases would see rotations of American forces and be built to operate alongside the 5 local bases the Philippines previously designated for American use under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement it signed with the states back in 2014. At least one of those bases will be in the north of the Philippines, and that would give the United States a perfect headquarters from which to observe what's happening in the Taiwan Strait, potentially serving as a launching point for American fighters should it need to get directly involved in the conflict. Naturally, China has opposed the construction of these bases, going as far as to accuse the US of not only trying to contain its militaristic ambitions, but also of driving a wedge between it and the Philippines with this decision. But what will anger China the most is that these bases would make American intervention in its upcoming war with Taiwan a very real possibility, perhaps turning Taiwan into the trigger point for a much larger conflict that would include dozens of other nations. So China is clearly preparing for something. But Taiwan has countermeasures of its own. The question now is whether those countermeasures would be able to stand up to a smash-and-grab invasion by Beijing. Should that be what China's planning with its crazy airbase upgrades, the world can only wait and see. Now that you have all this information, we'd like to know what you think about China's airbase upgrades. Are they a sign that China's preparing for an impending invasion of Taiwan? Or could China simply be carrying out long-delayed upgrades on its bases and have no immediate intentions of using the bases to launch a war against its neighbor? The latter seems unlikely, but let us know what you think in the comments section. Now watch this video or check out this video instead.